English. Now, to formally open this webinar, it is my pleasure to invite our representative from the Australian Mission to ASEAN, dialing in from Jakarta to deliver the opening remarks. Please welcome Senior Regional Portfolio Manager, Australian Mission to ASEAN, Ms. Bia Buspita. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Darlene. Good afternoon and welcome to our counter-trafficking partners and practitioners from across the ASEAN region and beyond. Thank you for joining today's webinar. On behalf of the Australian government, I'm pleased to welcome you to the 23rd webinar of our ASEAN-Australia counter-trafficking program. I would like to warmly welcome and thank our esteemed speakers, Her Excellency Emmeline Aglipoy-Villar, Undersecretary of Department of Social Welfare and Development from the Philippines, Judge Albertina Ho, Vice Chief of the Banten High Court, Indonesia, and Ms. Salila Nata Turusa, Gender and Human Rights National Program Officer from UNODC Regional Office for Southeast Asia and Pacific. Over the years, ASEAN has made notable achievements through stronger laws and plans, better victim protections, enhanced regional cooperation, and institutional reforms. Yet, women remain underrepresented in counter-trafficking leadership roles, particularly within law enforcement and the judiciary. UNODC reported that across Southeast Asia, female officers make up only 6 to 20% of the overall law enforcement workforce. Workforce diversity, and specifically the involvement of women at all levels of law enforcement and the judiciary, has been linked to improved case outcomes, higher reported cases, and more inclusive investigations focusing on the victims. We also know that greater gender diversity in the justice system enhances public trust and institutional accountability, yet barriers persist in advancing women's leaderships and decision-making roles. ASEAN and ASEAN member states deserve recognition for the meaningful steps taken to address this issue. Today, we are honored to hear from the women leaders and experts who are making positive changes in counter-trafficking and gender equality. Your insights on workplace diversity, particularly women's leadership in addressing complex and sensitive crimes, are invaluable. The Australian government remains a long-standing partner with ASEAN in this effort. In February this year, Australia just launched its new international gender equality strategy, that it recognizes the gender equality benefits everyone and is fundamental to peace, prosperity, and stability in our region. It also places gender equality at the heart of Australia's development cooperation and our regional partnership. We look forward to hearing your perspectives and ideas on how we can continue to support equality and inclusion in combating trafficking. Together, let us continue striving for justice systems that are effective, inclusive, equitable, and responsive to the diverse needs of the people, including victims of trafficking. Thank you, and over to you again, darling.
Thank you so much, Bia, for the inspiring message and, of course, setting the tone for today's webinar. We're all just as excited and looking forward to a very interesting discussions with our esteemed panelists. But before we continue, we would like to capture this moment with all of you. We kindly invite everyone to please turn on your cameras for our virtual group photo. So we will invite Judge Albertina and Miss Salila to join us as well. Okay. So our team will take a screenshot shortly, and let's give her a big smile, and we will wait for the cue. All right, or I'll make the cue. Ploy, please. Okay.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. One shot, please.
Can we do also another one with a wave?
Yes, of course. One, please. Okay. Thank you. Done.
Thank you so much, Ploy. So this webinar, the Zoom recording is there will be a Zoom recording, and of course, those who are interested with the presentation materials, they will be made available at our ASEAN-ACT portal. We will post later on a link in the chat box, the link to the Zoom recording and the materials. Okay. So we would be also be grateful if you could spare a minute or two to fill in a feedback survey that will be shared also in the chat box, a link to the feedback on the conduct of this webinar, because you will also receive a certificate of attendance after the completion of the feedback. All right. So thank you. Now, I'd like to share with you also the objectives of this webinar. So today's session will build on the spirit of International Women's Day, as already also mentioned by Bia, and that which we celebrated last month. So while ASEAN has made great progress in combating trafficking in persons, women remain underrepresented in leadership and operational roles across law enforcement and justice institutions. So this webinar will focus on a very timely an important topic. How do we strengthen women's participation and leadership in counter trafficking efforts? So, through this webinar, we will discuss, or our panelists will discuss, the roles of women's leadership in delivering effective victim centered counter trafficking approaches, including the gaps and barriers to women's participation in leadership roles, and of course, what are the possible ways that we can take to promote women's advancement in the justice system. Now, to gain a better understanding of what our participants think about today's topic, we have prepared two polls. I will read the polls. This will be flashed on the screen. I will read this for translation purposes. Now, for poll question number one, what is the biggest barrier to increasing women's participation in counter trafficking efforts? So you can choose one from among those choices. So the first bullet, mainstream gender responsive strategies with accountability mechanism to track and address any gaps, increase programs on leadership, capacity building, and mentoring for women, introduce policies and practice that support more inclusive, family-friendly workplaces for women's participation in decision making. And the fourth bullet, raise awareness among policymakers for more gender equality. Second poll, which action do you think ASEAN and member states should prioritize to accelerate women's leadership in counter trafficking efforts? Also, a single choice. Now, first bullet, mainstreaming gender responsive strategies in institutions with mechanisms to track progress, increasing programs on leadership, capacity building, and mentoring for women. Third bullet, creating an environment for women's full participation in counter trafficking. And the fourth bullet, raising awareness among decision makers for gender equality reform. So there you go. We will give you a few minutes or a minute to fill this up. This poll is a anonymous poll. Please click on the answer of your choice. Now, this won't be used in any other platform, but only for this webinar. Okay. So thank you for putting in your choices. Now, let us begin the first presentation. Let us welcome our first speaker, Ms. Salila Narataruksa, the Gender and Human Rights National Program Officer of UNODC, Regional Office for Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Now, serving at UNODC, Ms. Salila provides advice and technical expertise on the mainstreaming of human rights and gender for program and design and implementation across the UNODC regional and country offices. She worked extensively on research and policy on right-based and gender-sensitive criminal justice system for women and girls who come into contact with the law and deprived of liberty. We're very fortunate to have Ms. Alila with us to present the UNODC study entitled Women in Law Enforcement in the ASEAN Region and share with us the findings and main challenges in terms of policy and individual issues. Now, Ms. Alila, you have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Darlene, and thank you, colleagues and everyone. สวัสดีค่ะ. Good afternoon from Bangkok. May I please just have a thumb up from you if you can hear me loud and clear? All right, thank you so much. I'm very honored to join an amazing panel today, and also even more so when asked to be the one to kind of first give an overview of the situation regarding women empowerment in law enforcement and criminal justice system in relation to counter trafficking. That is such a big and important topic. And I'll try my best to capture the regional overview for you today within the limited time that we would have together. I will be sharing my screen now, and then just 1 second. All right, I think everyone should see it if nothing is going wrong. As you can see, my focus in talking to you today would be touching on specifically fostering gender equality in law enforcement sector and giving you some overview of what has the findings and the recommendations from international forums been for the Southeast Asia region. And I believe that some other section related to this topic, say experience of women more so in criminal justice system in the larger sector, say judges or prosecutors might be further on touched on by subsequent speakers. So I'll focus on law enforcement for my portion today. But before we jump to that, I would like to just quickly show you, just because we're talking about trafficking in persons today, the global overview of victim of trafficking that we are seeing in the latest statistic that we have. Here you will see that global trend from 2024 showing a large portion of women and girls who are now victims of human trafficking detected across the world. This is the number that you see on the screen now is the ratio by 100,000 people. So you see that by both raw number, the orange being the woman and the lighter orange being the girl, if you cannot see clearly, and by percentage, global wise, you see that 39% of women and 22% of girls make up the portion of victims of human trafficking. Even more so, when you move the lens to East and Southeast Asia and the Pacific, you'll see that 39% for women as well, 40% for girls being victims of human trafficking. And you'll see the portion change here and there in each region, but usually there will be traffic for the purpose of sexual exploitation, as well as some for forced labor as well. While young boys, you also see an increasing in trafficking for sexual exploitation as well. Why am I showing you this number? When we talk about gender equality within law enforcement or women empowerment, things are not as simple as saying that, oh, because we have more women victims now, so we need more police officers. That is just simply, it's not that simple. But what we're trying to say that with the very fast changing scene in criminal justice, in crime that are happening, you see that the multifaceted nature of crime and victimhood and the diverse group of people that have stake in the policy relating to criminal justice system. So we're trying to break away from the notion that crime prevention is a masculine job. Crime prevention is a job that's prescribed to a single group of people. That's what we're trying to say, because in terms of efficacy, in terms of functioning, and both in terms of human rights standpoint, law enforcement will always benefit from a more diverse force that come in representing diverse perspective of people. So I would like to put that clear in a way of the premise of what we're talking today. And in terms of international framework that I'm referring to today, I think everyone would be very, very familiar with the Women, Peace and Security Resolution, or the Security Resolution Security Council Resolution 1325, which is calling for a full and meaningful participation of women in building peace and security. But when we say meaningful participation, I would like to pose a question for the floor here. Does that simply mean adding more women officers to the force? Simply. And I would assume that a lot of your mental answer to me right now would be probably not. But what does it take to have a meaningful participation of women in peace building? From our standpoint, from UNOT's standpoint, we see that in crime prevention, in fostering gender equality in crime prevention, we aim to cover two ends of the crime prevention effort. On the left side, external national policy, we aim to create a policy that see everyone and cater to the needs of everyone. But also on the right side, which is I'm talking about today, gender equality within law enforcement agencies is also a very important step in creating a workforce, a police force, law enforcement force that would create a long-lasting impact for everyone and sustainably keep everyone who can thrive and grow together. And because that is our main interest, so across the globe, we have various publications on this. The one that I'm touching on right now would be the research on women law enforcement in the ASEAN region, which I'll send the link in the chat once I'm done with my presentation. If you have seen this research once in a while before, because we published this back in 2020, you'll see that underrepresentation of women law enforcement across all ASEAN region are still prevalent, yellow being women in law enforcement. So we'll see number varies, but it ranges from 6 to 20, as it was mentioned just now before. And I think it's probably changed somewhat a little right now, and the research is due to revise the number very soon. But as of when we conducted the study, this is the number that we get. And we get to talk to so many law enforcement officers. So I would like to share some key findings with you today to set the floor. We touch on various topics, but I will try to sort of fly through some of the key things and some of the recommendations that we see are coming from the research. So first of all, our finding from recruitment, training, and capacity building, we see that across our region, setting quota for women's recruitment will always range from 10 to 30%, and that 10 to 30% is used as a ceiling, not as the minimum requirement of the force. For what it means is that sometime when certain police agency reach, like say 15% for their quota, they stop there, right? They see it as like a ceiling. There were still some women-only admission conditions that are extremely discriminatory for women who apply for the job in law enforcement. There are also conversely some institutions that will set qualification that's available only among men. So not directly discriminating against women, but they would not be able to have that qualification. Or some women will still face some barrier in terms of participating in international training due to language or travel limitations due to their culture as well. So we see some glass ceiling there in terms of recruitment, training, and capacity building. In terms of deployment to the field, we see that operational field work is still viewed as male dominant. Women will not be selected, or the programs will not be open for the women officers to apply for operational role. And usually women who desire more of those roles will feel discouraged of applying because sometimes facilities or the settings or some other surrounding circumstances will discourage them from applying to become part of that force. And also sometimes they offer much better work-life balance in administrative roles and influencing a lot of women that we talk to in choosing to go for that route again because they have other obligations like their family life, that they cannot avoid to answer to. So that also decrease the chance of deployment, therefore sort of like decrease their portfolio in a way. If you think of, sometimes you're going for being promoted, they'll see, oh, how much experience you have. And, sometimes if you don't have field deployment experience, there's not much for you to go further. And of course, then I'll quickly touch on promotions. Women leaders, we are told many times by more junior officers that when they say that there are women leaders in their force, that inspire them to continue to stay on in the force because it seemed possible for them to be able to thrive and sort of like continue their career there. And of course, because most of people who hold decision-making powers are still men. The people we talk to also agree that support from their male bosses are also very crucial because of the current leadership roles that most of them have. So it's very important to create gender equality where you sort of rally allies from both men and women, and not being assigned to operational roles, investigation or specialist team, very, very greatly limit their career advancement opportunity. Then now I'll touch on what does it look like? What does the recommendations from all the field that are being given to us in terms of recruitment? The international recommendations are that, targeted and outreaching and fair qualification setting and some quota setting are still important in terms of creating more participation from women in law enforcement. I would like to give one example of how law enforcement from Singapore celebrate their women in law enforcement and also encourage more young girls to be interested in the force. So if you go to their sort of like official website, you'll see that the Singapore National Police Force, like, excuse me if I say the official name wrong, they will have dedicated page highlighting the work and importance of women in law enforcement, women in their forces. They have national event that engage new recruits, that engage sort of young adults, girls who are interested in joining the force, coming to the field to learn about qualification that they have to satisfy. They would have a lot of sort of media that represent both men and women in action on MRT, on their train and sort of public spaces, and sort of normalizing the images of both women and men in law enforcement, including roles like special forces. They also put out regularly the story of, say, star operator, as you see here, in order to create like public perception and sort of encourage more interest from the public, because you have to fight across the gender belief that women are not made for law enforcement work. So young girls are not encouraged from when they were young to be interested in security or in law enforcement. And that is the work that they have to fight against. Another angle, I think I'll be done in like 2 minutes. Target community engagement activities, which I think are a very good idea from the force as well. So they would regularly hold sort of like community outreach with the people. For example, this is a Facebook post from the Singapore Police Force, inviting any woman, general public, to join the self-defense class with their female police forces in order to create like positive engagement with them and have them see the importance of the work of the police force and the women in the force, so that empowering each other across the section from police to the general public, they try to create some seamless perception, positive perception between what it takes and the importance of it, that we have more women in the force. So that is one example that I would like to highlight for just general idea for you. And then on deployment, of course, equal chance to training and non-discriminatory criteria. It's very important. And they also recommendation on role rotation, where you don't get certain group of officers, stuck in one role or one deployment field, but you try to get everyone to have a chance to be deployed as much as possible. Having clinical counseling, because sometimes when you deploy to certain area, you might get some mental health issues from it. You might even develop PTSD. Having mental health support is something that they encourage that the law enforcement agency should have ready, and a very strong safety oversight for all, both men and women officers are very, very important. And also another example from the Philippines, where they run a pilot all women police station in one location in the Philippines, and they end up performing really well, despite in the beginning where some officer experienced some abuse from the community. This is their words that telling us. Because in the beginning, the community thought that, you know, the community would be worse off. They will not be as safe when everyone in the police stations are women. But because of the very rigorous training and a lot of preparation that they made beforehand, they end up performing, you know, just as well, or they even rank #1 performance in some of the cases that they are able to intercept. So that's the one thing that can disprove that, you know, just because you're a woman, you cannot perform law enforcement duties. It's not true, because this is all female police forces that they're piloting it. So that is one example where you actually give the space for people to try and thrive and sort of succeed, because they wouldn't know if they can do it if they were never given the space to. And lastly, human resource and infrastructure, retention policy. So if you successfully recruit enough women law enforcement officers, right, but you cannot keep them. You do not have human resource infrastructure that recognize sort of their gender specific need, or understand the reason of why certain officers leave the force, why certain officers stay on with the force. Then you will never be able to create a sustainable force, because you keep having a turnover rate. So some flexible work policy, a very strong retention policy, fair parental leave for them, infrastructure that look at the need of both men and women are very important. Developing facility that would ensure both of their safety, and not just, you know, at the headquarter location, but at any field locations. All of this play into influencing the decision of the current workforce in thinking whether they should give up their career or if they should continue to try to make a difference here. Because at the end of the day, you know, you look out for yourself, right? When you're like an individual. So you have to think about all those areas in order to not just recruit, but keep them. And of course, promotion leadership, if there are any opportunity for promoting or for sort of developing skills, all officers should have equal access to. If there are fast track promotional lane, it shouldn't be accessed just by, you know, a certain group of people. Like, people should be equally given the opportunity to access those opportunity. We're not saying that everyone have to be promoted, but we're saying everyone should have a fair chance of access and trying to be considered. So that those are two very different things. And we're talking about getting a fair chance here. I will leave. So I think I leave my time, and I will leave with like an encouraging quote from one of the police Lieutenant General Ross, which is a Deputy Commissioner General from Cambodia National Police, who talked to us about her career and her struggle into rising through the rank to becoming the only Police Lieutenant General and like is a Deputy Commissioner right now. That for all the young girls and aspiring girls out there, it's very essential to seek both leadership and technical training to establish a well-rounded skill set that will serve as a strong foundation for your career advancement. So if the system itself doesn't give you that chance to develop, then there's no way for them to search for, right? So it goes both ways is what I'm trying to say. If you want more diverse force, if you want to empower your women in law enforcement, you cannot just ask them to see the value of their work, but you have to make them see that they are valued as well. things have to be both way like that for it to be sustainable. So I think I'll leave it for now, and I'm happy to continue the conversation with the floor after this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Leela. You have provided us with very rich insights based on the study. It is really very interesting to note that gender balance is really not just about the numbers of women involved, but really, as you mentioned, creating that system or that enabling environment in terms of those things that you enumerated: deployment, human resource, infrastructure, promotion, and leadership. So we really hope to know more about this during the open discussion. And thank you for sharing those examples, very clear examples, and to drive that strong point on what it means to have women leaders now. So thank you again. For our second speaker is Judge Albertina Ho, Vice Chief of Banten High Court in Indonesia. Judge Albertina Ho is a prominent figure in the judiciary. She's widely known for her integrity and dedication to upholding the law in Indonesia. She currently serves as the Vice Chief of the Banten High Court. Previously, she was appointed to serve on the supervisory board of the Corruption Eradication Commission, or the KPK. She has also held positions as a judge at the South Jakarta District Court, Chief Judge of Bekasi District Court, High Court Judge at the Medan High Court, Vice Chief Judge of the Kupang High Court, and Coordinator Assistant and Serving Secretary of the Deputy Chief Justice of the Supreme Court for Judicial Affairs. She is recognized for handling several high-profile cases in Indonesia that have attracted national attention. Judge Albertina has dedicated her life to the judiciary for over 3 decades. She is also active in various initiatives that promote judicial reform and the empowerment of women in the legal sector. She often encourages Indonesian women not to be afraid to take on roles in any position, even in fields or profession dominated by men, or those considered to have high risk if undertaken by women. So Judge Albertina, please, the floor is yours.
Selamat siang untuk para narasumber maupun para peserta.
Afternoon,
Terima kasih
colleagues
sekali
and
saya diberi
participants.
kesempatan
I
untuk bisa
am
bergabung
grateful for the
dalam acara ini
opportunity
dan bisa mungkin sedikit
to speak
menyampaikan
here
apa yang kami
and
alami
present
dunia keadilan
an
Indonesia.
overview of the
Dari slide
situation
kami
in
mencoba
Indonesia.
menyampaikan mengenai peran kepemimpinan perempuan
I
dalam
would like to
upaya
present
pemberantasan tindak pidana
about
perdagangan
the
orang,
role
singkat dengan
of women's leadership in
memang
combating
peran
trafficking in
perempuan
persons.
di dalam pemberantasan
The
tindak
role
pidana
of
tipikor
women
ini
in
dikatakan
combating
penting.
trafficking in persons
Karena kalau yang pertama saya bisa mengatakan ini
has
penting
rooms
karena
for improvements.
kalau kita lihat dari yang disampaikan oleh Bu Salila tadi berdasarkan data yang ada,
Salila previously presented some
lebih
interesting
banyak
data,
korban itu perempuan dan anak perempuan.
and we learned that majority
Berarti
of victims are women and
lebih
girls.
banyak perkara-perkara yang ditangani oleh pengadilan itu
That means
yang ditangani oleh pengadilan
the cases
korbannya adalah perempuan dan anak.
adjudicated at courts
Biasanya
mostly involve
umumnya
women
perempuan
and girls.
itu dia akan lebih percaya
In
dan
general,
menyampaikan sesuatu itu lebih terbuka apabila
women will
APH-nya
be
aparat penegak
more
hukumnya
open
juga
to share what
semuanya
happened to
dibuka.
her or what she
Saya tidak berbicara
experienced
dalam
when the
kategori ini gender atau bukan, tapi kenyataannya
law
seperti itu.
enforcement
Biasanya
officers are also
merasa
women,
dipercaya kepada sesama
so
perempuan.
they have more trust on women officers.
Dari situ kemudian kita juga bisa lihat bahwa
and
biasanya umumnya yang saya
We
lihat
can
dari
also
pengalaman
see,
yang saya alami,
and this is based on my
biasanya perempuan
experience.
APH perempuan dia akan lebih hati-hati
In general, women
dalam
police
menangani
officers
perkara-perkara yang menyangkut
are
korbannya itu
more
perempuan
careful
dan
when
korbannya
addressing
itu anak perempuan.
women
Biasanya
and
lebih
girls victims of any crimes.
meskipun ada saya katakan
Although this might not
kemudian
apply to everyone.
hal ini tidak mudah untuk perempuan peran di sini. Kalau saya melihat khususnya di
And this
Indonesia,
is not,
itu ada kesenjangan dan ada hambatan.
well, this doesn't happen in all parts of Indonesia. There are gaps
Adalah wilayah Indonesia itu sangat
and
luas.
challenges in our country because
Kami
Indonesia
pengadilan itu
is
tersebar
a
di seluruh
big
Indonesia
country.
itu untuk pengadilan tingkat pertama saja lebih dari 400-an.
We have more than
Indonesia itu
400
sangat
first
luas.
level courts
Kami
throughout the country.
kami itu ditempatkan di seluruh Indonesia. Di
So
seluruh
we
Indonesia.
have
Ini yang
judges
sulit bagi perempuan
and police officers in all regions in Indonesia.
sangat jauh dari
However,
rumahnya.
that also means that sometimes women judges would have to be deployed to a court location which is very far from their native place of origin or where their family lives.
Perjalanan ke Medan, ujung sana ke Banda Aceh.
Jakarta, our capital city, is located in the center of the archipelago.
Kemudian kalau kita ke
If we travel to the tip west part of Indonesia, we have to fly for 2 hours. If we travel to the eastern tip of Indonesia, we have to fly for 6 hours to Papua. So hopefully this can give you an idea how big our country is. And this geography, this proximity has caused issues for women judges as it is more difficult for them to part from their other family members. On the other hand, TIP cases occur in all parts of Indonesia in various cultures of Indonesia. So the further we go to the east, the more TIP cases we have identified. It doesn't mean that in the western part of Indonesia we don't find such cases, but what I'm trying to say is we find more in the eastern Indonesia. The next problem, the next challenge is lack of gender sensitivity among law enforcement officers.
Justru perempuan sendiri
in court proceedings, we can see that some law enforcement officers who are women still have biases. They are not sensitive against women victims. Sometimes a woman judge would ask a question to a victim, something that is quite judgmental, like, why did you have to leave your house when it's late at night? And in Indonesia, we don't have many women judges. There are only approximately 25% of total 8,000 judges who are women. So these 25% of judges, so approximately 2,000 women judges, only 29% of them have high positions or roles in the first level court. This reflects that women leadership is still limited or low.
lalu itu
And
mungkin sekitar
this
beberapa
rate
tahun yang
is
lalu
already
perempuan di Indonesia itu sedikit,
an
tidak sampai
improvement. In the previous years, there were even less.
Selanjutnya, untuk mengatasi hambatan
There were only 20% of women judges before. And in order to address this challenge, we have to strive to increase women participation and the number of women law enforcement officers to address the TIP.
sosialisasi juga memberikan
We
kesadaran
share, we disseminate information and raise awareness
hakim-hakim perempuan ini juga untuk
of
tidak menolak
these
kalau
women judges
diberi kesempatan untuk menduduki jabatan sebagai pimpinan di pengadilan.
to strive.
Atau
So we advocate so that these women judges are given higher position at courts.
Indonesia yang
And we also encourage
kan tidak
them,
seterusnya.
the women judges,
Dan waktu
to
tertentu akan kembali lagi alih lagi
not
tidak
resign
ini
if
perlu
they are
diberikan, kesadaran juga
assigned to
hakim-hakim
a
atau
court
hakim-hakim
in a remote area, because
hakim-hakim perempuan
they
yang
will be transferred to another location after
Lalu,
several years
samping itu
anyway.
juga kita memberikan kesempatan juga
In
kepada
addition to
perempuan
that,
untuk menjadi pimpinan
we
pengadilan.
give broader or bigger opportunities for women judges
Pimpinan pengadilan itu kalau dulu dimungkinkan di satu pengadilan,
to take leadership roles in courts.
ketua dan wakilnya dua laki-laki. Tapi tidak
In the
boleh
past,
ketua dan wakil
chief and deputy chief of courts were always men.
Sudah
We advocate
hampir 10 tahun
this.
Mahkamah Agung sudah
We advocated this, and starting from 10 years ago, the Supreme Court
satu pengadilan
has
ketuanya perempuan dan
an enabling policy
wakilnya. Menurut
which
saya
encourages
besar untuk
a
kepemimpinan,
woman
memberikan kesempatan
chief
yang luas
or deputy chief
perempuan di Indonesia.
in a court.
Khususnya di
And
pengadilan.
this means a bigger opportunity
Lokasi yang terakhir
for
kita lihat di minggu yang lalu,
women judges in Indonesia.
perempuan yang akan
Even last week,
sebagai ketua pengadilan negeri di Jakarta Pusat.
the Supreme
Salah
Court
satu pengadilan yang
passed
di ibu kota.
an announcement to support
Lalu tentu saja juga
more
tidak
women
bisa
judges at
tinggal
the
diam saja.
top leadership
Dengan
at
kurangnya
courts.
kepemimpinan perempuan, dengan kurangnya APH perempuan,
And
lalu kita
in
biarkan
view of the
korban-korban
lack
PPO
of
ini
women
tidak
leadership
diselesaikan
in
dengan baik,
our
atau diselesaikan
law enforcement,
tidak memperhatikan
we
sensitivitas.
we worry that
Ini juga
many
tidak bisa.
TIP cases will be
Makanya kalau saya lihat
addressed
di sini,
in
saya tawarkan di sini atau saya
insensitive
sampaikan di sini,
manner.
bahwa kita juga perlu memberikan sosialisasi,
This is why
pelatihan
I
tentang
always
TPPO
try
kepada
to
semua
share
bukan
and
hanya
conduct
hakim
trainings
perempuan,
on
tapi
introduction
kepada
of
semua hakim.
TIP to all judges.
Supaya dalam penanganan
So
perkara-perkara
not only to women judges, but to everyone. Because we need everyone, we need every judge to know how to address women and girls victims of TIP.
kesetaraan gender.
And because we want all judges to apply gender
Sebenarnya,
equality
Mahkamah Agung
principles.
sudah membuat, saya sampaikan di sini ada 2 peraturan yang
Our Supreme Court
pertama yaitu
also
peraturan Mahkamah Agung nomor 3
issued
tahun
2
2017
regulations.
tentang
The
pedoman
first one
mengenai
is Supreme
cara
Court
peradilan
regulation
dengan hukum. Jadi ada
on
buku
guidelines for
pedoman yang dibuat oleh
adjudicating
Mahkamah Agung
cases involving women in
supaya
conflict with the law.
hakim-hakim dalam
And
menangani
also the
perkara
Supreme Court issued or passed a handbook
korbannya perempuan,
on adjudicating
perdakwanya
such
perempuan,
cases.
saksinya perempuan,
So because in
atau
many
pihaknya perempuan
court
harus
proceedings,
memperhatikan kesetaraan gender.
women,
Itu sudah diatur.
the defendants are women,
Namun,
or there are
hanya yang perlu
women
sekarang adalah
victims.
bagaimana tentu saja
So the panel of judges and everyone relevant in the court
seluruh
would
hakim,
have to
bukan
know
hanya hakim perempuan.
how to
Lalu
address
ada
them.
juga tidak kalah menarik adalah juga satu peraturan Mahkamah Agung yaitu nomor
And
1 tahun
there's also
2002
another regulation, which is
tentang cara
Supreme Court Regulation
penyelesaian
number 1
permohonan
of
restitusi
2002
dan
on claims
kompensasi
for
kepada korban tindak
restitution
pidana.
and compensation
Dalam
for
peraturan Mahkamah
crime
Agung ini
victims.
atur bagaimana hakim-hakim itu
So
menangani
this regulation
perkara-perkara
stipulates
tindak pidana
how
yang
judges
bisa memberikan restitusi pada
adjudicate
korban. Jadi
cases
terdakwa dibebani membayar ganti rugi.
and
Tentu
also
saja korban antara lain adalah korban dari
restitution and
TPPO.
compensation for
Nah, ini
victims,
juga
namely for
menjadi
victims of TIP.
sorotan atau menjadi perhatian dari Mahkamah Agung Indonesia ini.
TIP cases
Sehingga ini
have
juga
received
diatur di mana dimungkinkan
major attention from our
menggabungkan
Supreme Court.
pemberian restitusi itu dengan proses pemeriksaan perkara
Supreme Court
pidananya
has
dan juga
made the
dimungkinkan
efforts
apabila
to
ini sebagai
combine
perbuatan hukum
the
tetap
criminal procedure,
dimungkinkan
and
juga
once the
mengajukan
court
permohonan restitusi atau ganti
makes a
rugi itu
ruling,
secara
then
tersendiri.
it
Itu
will
juga
be
dimungkinkan.
accompanied
Nah,
with
dengan
claims for
keadaan yang
restitution
demikian ini,
for the
kami
victims.
harapkan mudah-mudahan penanganan TPPO
We're
khususnya
hoping that this
dan tindak
measure
pidana lainnya
will
yang
strengthen
adalah
our
perempuan ini mungkin
uh,
bisa akan lebih baik lagi.
measures to address TIP
Mungkin itu garis
cases,
besar yang kami
namely
sampaikan
as well as other crimes
pengalaman kami
against
di
women and
Indonesia
children.
menghadapi
So that would be
pemberantasan tindak
all
pidana
about my
kekerasan.
experiences of
Terima kasih.
adjudicating TIP cases in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Albertina, for sharing with us your very rich insights and experiences. You are definitely an epitome of women empowerment, not only among Indonesian judges, but of course, women in all fields. So thank you again, Judge. Now, for our third speaker, I take great pleasure in introducing our last but certainly not the least speaker, distinguished speaker, Honorable Emeline Aglipay Villar, Undersecretary of the Department of Social Welfare and Development of the Philippines, or the DSWD. Now, prior to being an undersecretary of the DSWD, she served as undersecretary for legal services and liaison cluster of the Department of Justice and was Undersecretary in charge of the Interagency Council Against Trafficking in Persons of the Philippines. She earned her law degree from the University of the Philippines and her Master's of Laws at the London School of Economics and Political Science. In 2012, Undersecretary Emmeline was one of the youngest recipients of the Outstanding Young Men, or the TOYM Award for Public Service. She was a senior lecturer of constitutional law at the University of the Philippines College of Law and was also a three-term congresswoman. She was a principal author of various legislative acts promoting rights of women, workers, children, and persons with disability. I am really honored to welcome our third speaker, and very honored to meet her again, as I had the opportunity to work with her very briefly when we were both with the Department of Justice. So, Yusek Villar, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Darlene. Fellow advocates, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. In today's webinar on Women as Drivers of Change, I will be discussing the institutional and societal barriers to women taking leadership positions in the fight against trafficking, and how involving women in different aspects of combating human trafficking, as well as and policy-making positions, is a step towards eliminating trafficking in persons. In engaging with our ASEAN neighbors, it is always encouraging to start with a milestone that all the ASEAN member states, without exception, ratified and made legally binding the ASEAN Convention Against Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. One of the whereas clauses explicitly recognizes the special vulnerability of women and children to being exploited. The ASEAN Gender Sensitive Guideline for Handling Women Victims of Trafficking in Persons likewise acknowledged the special concerns and needs of women and girls in order for the government to provide proper services to them, such as healthcare, interviews, safe shelter, and psychosocial support, among others. But why is there a special concern and treatment for women and children, particularly girls? If we can see from the data in the next slide, because it shows that most TIP victims are female. In the Philippines, 64% of victims from 2022 to 2024 are women. Even among the respondents, where a big chunk of it are considered facilitators, the majority are women. Hence, it is just sensible that it is more beneficial for more women to be in leadership positions in order to come up with more responsive and effective policies, both in the preventive and response sides. The same can be said in cases of online sexual abuse and exploitation of children, or OSAEC, which is a form of trafficking in persons. And now it is in the Philippines a crime in itself. Most child victims are also females, as you can see in the data. Philippine data from 2022 to 2024 shows that 74% of the victims are girls. It is also noteworthy to state, however, that there has been an upward trend of boys becoming victims of asai. In the Philippines, data shows that women's participation in the labor market is still restricted by stereotyped gender roles and expectations. This includes having domestic obligations of childcare and household work. A quick search of search engines would give us stereotyped gender roles and expectations in the workplace. Even if it is true that women excel in those roles, so these are the gender roles and jobs that women usually take, or majority are occupied by women. And we see here that uh, even if we women occupy these roles, it is limiting and counterproductive to confine women to only these areas or these roles. Primarily, it is noteworthy that, with the exception of office manager, no leadership position stands out among these stereotype roles for women. In relation to anti trafficking in persons efforts, it is also interesting to note that the roles of caregiver and social workers as also stereotype roles for women. In fact, since 1951, majority or roughly 70% of those who became heads of the Social Welfare Department of the Philippines are women, while men dominate the other departments, especially in the law enforcement and the justice sector. In trafficking in persons law enforcement and justice sectors, one of the pervasive challenges is the difficulty, if not the failure, to prosecute the case by reason of the unwillingness of the victim survivors to participate in the proceedings and to cooperate with the law enforcement agents and prosecutors. Often, it is reported that the victim survivors hide from the agents and the prosecutors because they fear them, or because of lack of interest in the outcome of the case. Or worse, they may also give into the monetary offers of the perpetrators in exchange of withdrawing from the case. This may be attributed to the lack of proper and gender sensitive handling of the victim survivors by the said sector players, which can very well be addressed by enhancing women representation in these sectors, particularly in leadership positions. Philippine data shows that women representation in politics is still disproportionately low. Key cabinet positions remain at a dismal rate of 11.42%. The same can be said for women representation in Congress, albeit a little higher at 30.4% for the senators and 28% for the House of Representatives. Yet, the 2024 report from the World Bank on Women, Business, and Law indicated that the Philippines holds the second highest position in Southeast Asia in terms of legal and economic gender equality. This proves that while the legal structures exist, on the ground execution and enforcement of the laws is sorely lacking, and the objectives set forth by the existing policies are not achieved. A significant amount of work remains to be done, especially in terms of recruitment, provision of support for women leaders, and capacity building. On this point, let me allow me please to share a few narratives based on real experiences of real women in politics and law enforcement that show us some of the challenges that we women encounter in a male-dominated workplace. Narrative 1 is X was doing well as an officer in a division in a law enforcement agency dealing with trafficking in persons. As the most experienced and qualified officer in the division, she was considered for promotion as the head of the division. Despite favorable recommendations, a man who was objectively less experienced and qualified for the position was appointed in her stead, and X was even unceremoniously transferred to another division. We see here a possible case of discrimination based on gender. Narrative 2. X was newly elected representative in Congress. In a social gathering, her male colleagues, while addressing the audience, teased her that she was worth 10,000 pesos, alluding to the practice of men choosing sex workers of their preference in a prostitution den. This elicited a strong laughter from the audience. This shows tolerance of both men and women to gender related harassment. Narrative 3. X was promoted as head of a division in a law enforcement agency. She was asked by her colleagues, "Sino ang boyfriend mo dyan sa mga deputy at na-appoint ka?" If translated in English, she was asked, "Who is your boyfriend among the deputy heads?" And because of this, you probably got appointed as head of the division. This shows assumptions of incompetence of women in leadership positions, such that they would need a boyfriend who is a chief in order to secure a leadership position. Narrative 4. The narrative 4 actually came from our uh, trafficking in persons materials provided in relation to our webinar today. Might be an undetected or an unconscious stereotype role of women in our TIP materials. It stated, one of the objectives of this webinar is to highlight the importance of women leadership in counter trafficking in persons, showcasing the unique contribution of women in victim support. This reinforces the stereotype role of women in positions that provide care and support to victims. However, women are also effective and have a unique contribution in other roles, such as in investigation, in prosecution, and rendering judgment in court. Now we talk about best practices. The Philippines has achieved gender equality in some of the key positions in the judiciary. Women judges now comprise half or 56% of trial court judges, which are the front lines in delivering justice to TIP victims. We also observe that we have the Interagency Council Against Trafficking officer in charge, who is a woman. We have the National Coordinating Council Against OSAIC and CISAM as also a woman. We have the DSWD permanent representative to the IACAT is also a woman. That's me. And the DOJ, the Department of Justice National Prosecution Service Task Force on Women and Children, dealing with trafficking in persons cases. The head is also a woman. Since their nearly simultaneous appointment to these positions, it has been noticeable that the dynamic and working environment among these four key institutions are more cohesive, inclusive, and collaborative. Stakeholders are more involved as the leadership shows more empathy, active listening, and openness. The approaches in combating TIP have likewise become more victim centered and gender sensitive. These are the four key result areas of anti trafficking in persons efforts of the government. I emphasized on number three, which is prosecution and law enforcement, on being very male dominated or as being occupied by as being classified as a stereotype me role. Fortunately, divisions or subunits were created under the prosecution service and law enforcement agencies that can cater specifically to trafficking in persons and concerns for women and children. This specialization widens the space for women to lead the said division or subunits. Particularly, these units are the Anti-Trafficking Women and Children Task Force under the National Prosecution Service of the DOJ, Women and Children Protection Center under the Philippine National Police, the Human Trafficking Division under the National Bureau of Investigation, the Anti-Violence Against Women and Children Division under the National Bureau of Investigation. All these subunits are presently led by women, and they have likewise shown exemplary outcomes. For our ways forward, women representation in leadership positions should not be limited to gender stereotype roles in the realm of protection and reintegration of TIP victim survivors. More opportunities should be given to women to occupy leadership positions in all key result areas, especially prosecution and law enforcement, as well as in other political posts, which are the cabinet posts, Congress, and the judiciary. This thrust should be thoroughly and quantitatively monitored. It must be emphasized that providing more opportunities for women in leadership roles does not mean that we will exclude men or their contributions in anti trafficking persons efforts. Instead, this is about creating a more balanced, a more inclusive environment where leadership reflects the diversity and special needs of the victim survivors so that the government can respond to them more effectively. Thank you very much and good afternoon. Darlene, I think your mic is still muted.
All right. Sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Yusek, for the very enlightening presentation. It is really interesting to know that even though we have the structures and frameworks in place, as you've mentioned, the challenge really is in the execution and mindsets. And of course, the narratives that you shared gave us a very good picture of that. So thank you so much, Yusek. We hope to know more during the open discussion. So before we open the floor for our panelists to answer your questions, we have been receiving some comments and questions. I would like to share the results of the polls we conducted in the beginning of the webinar. So, again, for purposes of translation, allow me to read the polls and its results this time. So the first question is, what is the biggest barrier to increasing women's participation in counter trafficking efforts? So we have a 32% from our participants who said that mainstream gender responsive strategies with accountability mechanism to track and address any gaps would be the biggest barrier. And the second barrier would be introduced policies and practices that support more inclusive, family friendly workplaces for women's participation and decision making. And coming in at a third is 23% increase programs on leadership, capacity building, and mentoring for women. And at 17%, raise awareness among policymakers for more gender equality. Now, for the second question, we have, which action do you think ASEAN and member states should prioritize to accelerate women's leadership in counter trafficking? So we have a 32% increasing programs on leadership, capacity building, and mentoring for women. And then at 28%, mainstreaming gender responsive strategies in institutions with mechanisms to track progress. And then at 26%, we have creating an environment for women's full participation in counter trafficking. And at 13%, we have raising awareness among decision makers for gender equality reform. All right. So thank you so much to all our participants for sharing your uh, thoughts here on our polls. And now we would like to invite our speakers or panelists to come on board, and we would love to hear your reflections, comments on the results of the polls. Yusek, maybe have you, since we already have you, maybe have you to share your thoughts first?
I agree. I actually, if I didn't have the chance to answer the poll, but if because I arrived just in time for my part. But if I had the chance to, I would have similarly answered it. I think that, and I mentioned it. I mentioned it actually. The top answer that was chosen in the polls. I actually mentioned it towards the end of my presentation in the ways forward. I said that uh, these these efforts that we are doing, like for instance, the laws that we have, uh, these should all be thoroughly and quantitatively monitored. And I emphasize that towards the end of my speech in the ways forward, because uh, like I said, even though we have these laws in place, we have the policies in place, they mean nothing if they're not implemented. They won't be able uh, to produce the desired results if they are not properly implemented, and we will be able to properly implement it if they are monitored, um, thoroughly and quantitatively and qualitatively monitored. Because sometimes, even if we achieve the numbers, our goals in the numbers, but in the quality of the services or quality of for instance, these programs, then if the quality is sacrificed, then it might not also be able to produce the desired results in terms of moving forward the agenda for women.
All right. Thank you so much, Yusek, and very well said. So, may we also hear from Judge Albertina?
Baik, terima kasih. Jawaban saya
Thank
kurang
you.
lebih sama dengan yang tadi,
My answer would be
bahwa
more or
memang
less the
kita harus
same.
akui hambatan yang terbesar itu,
We
hambatan yang
have to
terbesar itu adalah pengembangan
acknowledge
karir yang
that
tepat.
the biggest challenge
Batas ini bisa dibatasi di dalam
is
institusi
limited career
juga bisa
advancement
dibatasi di
or
dalam
development.
keluarganya.
We have to start giving
Juga
bigger
bisa.
opportunities. We can start
Sehingga
giving
institusi tidak
a,
membatasi,
a,
keluarga tidak diizinkan untuk mengembangkan.
we have to
Yang
raise
menjadi
awareness among
makanya tadi saya
family members, because
perlu
sometimes the
menyadarkan
institution gives opportunities
teman-teman yang
to
perempuan
female
ini untuk
officers or judges, but
mau
then
berkarir.
their family members object
Kemudian
to the for example, promotion
lalu
that
yang
a
berikutnya memang
a woman
tantangan dalam
judge
menyeimbangkan pekerjaan dan
accepts.
ini kurang lebih
So we have to
sama.
address the challenges at the workplace
Dalam
and
menyeimbangkan biasanya
at
yang
their
perempuan itu akan
home
mengalah
in the
dengan
same time.
suaminya kalau
Many
dia
women
wah
would
kurang enak juga suaminya hanya menggebu kaki biasa dia
resign or
dua atau
withdraw
tiga
from
bulan
their position if their
mengalah
husband
untuk ada
asked them
keseimbangan
to.
di dalam
They would
keluarga
sacrifice their
begitu.
career
Akhirnya
for the sake of the
balik lagi
family.
itu menjadi paham. Kemudian yang berikutnya untuk polling
And next,
yang kedua itu memang perlu kita itu adalah pemantauan. Cuma hanya
apologies,
dibicarakan
the audio is not good.
ngomong saja
So
macam-macam, tapi
So
semua
I
program
also
itu tidak
agree
dimana
that we cannot
implementasinya.
we cannot
Sebagai
rely
contoh
only
saya
on
menyampaikan juga
legislations.
tadi Mahkamah Agung sudah membuat
We have
peraturan
to
yang
take real measures and enforce
supaya tidak bisa
existing
gender
regulations.
mengakui adanya
I
kekerasan
mentioned
gender.
about 2
Jadi
Supreme
kalau
Court
tidak dibentuk bagaimana
regulations
pelaksanaan dari peraturan itu
about
sendiri,
adjudication of
supaya
cases, and we also have
tidak
many
ada
legislations on gender equality,
hasilnya
but
juga.
they will only be written on paper if they're not enforced. So we have to enforce them in order to get the results we expect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Albertina. So, same emphasis really that frameworks are not enough, but good execution of this would really matter as well. So, maybe also hear from Lila, please.
Hi, thank you so much. Yes, I think all of these choices essentially are what we found when we go into the field and talk to law enforcement officers, women law enforcement officers generally. And yes, the topic of limited career advancement, the choice number one, is usually the one that come up very often. So it's very in line with what we found, and like completely understandable, because if you look at it at the standpoint of, say, fresh graduate, if you're a fresh graduate, right, and you're thinking, okay, which route are we going to, like what kind of job you want to go in, what kind of difference you want to make in the society, you might find so much value in law enforcement, but if it's taking you nowhere, if you have not seen one police chief, right, who is a woman, it's very unlikely for you to be the first one. Logically, these are all very individual choice, so each individual would have very different outlook to it. But I can see why this one would be the one that discourage women from entering into law enforcement career so much. Another one, though, that we find that will drive them out from the force, they might already come in, but then they will decide to leave, would be when the work does not fit with the work requirement. So choice is 3, which is also high, I think. I don't remember what are the votes result, but when it starts clashing with the other obligations that they are requested either by their own preference. Some might prefer to, stay home and take care of their child, their parents, or by the gender role expectation. It might not be their wishes, but they have to answer to it anyway. They end up leaving the force at like 30 after they get married a while. So that generally sometimes happen a lot as well. So both of these can happen at the different stages in the career. And again, I really need to agree with Yusek on number 2, the action that ASEAN members should do. We do have a lot of policy and regulations. The one problem that we don't have is that we have enough regulations, but we don't do well in terms of implementation. And yeah, that's the drive, the actions that need to happen would be what would eventually create the change.
All right. Thank you so much, Leela. And thank you to our speakers for commenting on both poll results. And I think we have very good results there and reflections from all of you. So, in relation actually to our polls, we will also be playing video. Although our webinar is not really focused on law enforcers, just women in law enforcers, but this video is one of those videos from the perspective of a law enforcer, and a very good example of the implementation of some frameworks that they have. So this is a video by Andrea Kin from the Australian Federal Police, one of the Australia's key agencies in combating trafficking in persons. So this video will offers us a glimpse into how the AFP is championing gender equality and empowering women in law enforcement. So let us take a few minutes. It's only 5 minutes video, and watch this together.
Gender equality and women's representation is critical to effective policing and something the AFP takes seriously. The AFP understands that the victims and survivors of modern slavery and trafficking, both in Australia and internationally, are predominantly women and girls. We understand these crimes are violations of human rights and threaten security and prosperity across our region. Under the Australian Government's National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security and the National Action Plan to Combat Modern Slavery, the AFP has a key role in preventing, disrupting, investigating and prosecuting modern slavery crimes, including trafficking-related offences. The AFP acknowledges the disproportionate impact trafficking has on women and girls and how gender inequality, violence against women and harmful gender norms are major contributors. The AFP aims to provide holistic, gender-sensitive protection to all victims of slavery and trafficking. We know that recognising human trafficking and modern slavery can be difficult. The AFP runs a Look a Little Deeper initiative, supporting frontline officials to recognise and help someone at risk of modern slavery, including referring them to the AFP. Keeping the AFP on track and helping meet our obligations and respond effectively to traffic and gender-related issues, the AFP has developed the Human Trafficking and Slavery Strategic Plan and the International Gender Strategy. Internally, the AFP has the Diversity, Equity and Inclusion Strategy and the Gender Equity Action Plan that directs our actions. Combined, these strategies and actions help guide the AFP's response to different crime types, including trafficking. It improves our operational effectiveness and helps us build a diverse and inclusive workplace to combat crime. The AFP is aiming to improve gender representation and support gender equality across the organisation. The ratio of women in policing more often than not does not represent the communities we serve. Like other Australian policing organisations, the AFP is working to increase the number of women in sworn officer roles and has set a target to reach 30% women in sworn roles by 2028. It's not enough to just recruit more members into the organisation. The AFP must have women across all levels. There is a target set to achieve a 40-40 gender representation across our executive level staff, 40% women, 40% men, and the remainder made up of the best applicants. Offshore, the AFP has been key in delivering programs internationally, developing and building on the leadership skills of women in law enforcement, including across the Pacific and the Mekong. These programs bring together women across their regions to learn, share and develop key relationships, all of which are critical in combating transnational crime, including trafficking. Supporting our staff internally is not new within the AFP. In 2021, the AFP embarked on a partnership with the Australian Human Rights Commission, guided by the Australian Sex Discrimination Commissioner, to adopt a human rights-based approach for enduring change that aligns the AFP with values of diversity and inclusion. The findings identified several opportunities where the AFP could further support gender equality, including improving men's access to parental leave, supporting flexible working arrangements for both men and women, improving women's representation in leadership roles, and improving the management of staff's operational working patterns. The evidence base collected from this project has underpinned the framework and actions outlined in the AFP's Gender Equity Action Plan. As Commissioner Reece Kershaw has stated, diversity and inclusion are critical to delivering operational success and readiness. Research shows that when people of all genders are at the table, discussions are richer, decision-making processes are stronger, and organisations perform more effectively. The AFP is no exception, as we find immense value in amplifying their voices and promoting opportunities for women who enrich our workforce today and into the future. For a more diverse workforce, the AFP is well placed to provide holistic and tailored victim-centred support and protection that is trauma-informed and meets the unique needs of women and children.
All right. We still have time. So please, to our speakers, please hold your comments first. But we would really want to hear your thoughts on that video. But we would like to show one more video. It's a UNODC video. So Ms. Lila, you might be familiar with this, but it's a very good video as well that we would like to share with participants. Just one moment.
Women bring a unique perspective to judging. I think women are much more confident now to exercise or to use the intuition that they have and feel more confident in using it to dispense justice.
My mentor was very supportive. I learned some new things, and my mentor and I also exchanged information about our different legal systems. If I may say so, we both found it very illuminating, very interesting, and very educative as well. There will always be a challenge, but take a deep breath. Rest when you need to rest, but don't give up in pursuing your overall goal, because there is a line of women behind you, watching you and waiting for you to succeed so that they can come up behind you.
So There you go. Just the very quick one. And so may we invite now this time we'll invite Lila, then Judge Albertina, then Yusek, to please share your thoughts on the two videos that you've just seen. Those were very powerful videos from a law enforcer and from judges. So Lila, please.
Thank you so much. So I think we have two perspective, right? Law enforcement and judges, and I guess that make like two ends of the criminal justice system of the process. Well, not almost ends. We still have corrections at the end after judges. But yes, I guess when we come back again to the word full participation of women, it's not just one single point here, like more women here in a specific unit or specific section, but it's the integration into the entire function of the society, in this case, criminal justice system. Personally, I think I wouldn't go as far as insisting on that naturally women are better at certain thing, or men are naturally better at a certain thing, but we want to see the society where there's participation of all kind of perspectives in order to answer to different kind of perspectives to the clients, which are either offenders, prisoners, victims, plaintiffs, anyone. And I guess that's basically, in terms of function of it, that's where it would answer to, like coming with various perspective. I wouldn't know what are sort of like the background or insight or specific needs that say young boys would have growing up. So I will not be able to claim that I have insight to that. But some other, say, male judge might. Again, so we have so many diverse group of people that we have to serve, and I guess that where our call for integration and full participation stands in terms of serving the function. And on the other hand, in terms of fairness and equality, of course, why would you deny half of the population in not participating in this very public function of the society? So that would be my take.
Thank you so much, Lila. That was also very interesting to note as well. So may we hear also from Judge Albertina.
Menanggapi video tadi, kalau menurut saya
About the videos, my comments will be brief.
memerlukan peraturan
We do need
peraturan yang seimbang ya, yang seimbang.
enabling regulations
Kemudian
or
salah
legislations.
pentingnya adalah penegakan dari peraturan itu sendiri.
But
Jadi
what's also
kembali lagi
important
saya
is
ingatkan
enforcement of
implementasi dari
those
peraturan itu, karena saya lihat
regulations,
banyak peraturan-peraturan yang sudah ada yang sebenarnya
because
ideal, hanya
we do have
pemantauan
many
terhadap
regulations.
penegakan peraturan itu mungkin kurang,
However,
sehingga
they are not
masih ada
thoroughly
peraturan yang hanya
enforced.
di atas kertas, tapi
So
dalam pelaksanaannya itu
many of the prevailing regulations are only written on
menyumbat
paper. Once
tidak
again,
diketahui oleh pembentuk peraturan itu sendiri, sehingga pada
and
akhirnya
law enforcement
tujuan dari
may
kita
not
membentuk
have
peraturan itu pun
thorough
tidak
understanding about how
kalau
to implement the
penegakannya itu
clauses
tidak ada.
on
Karena itu
cases
perlu
or
pemantauan
during
dan
adjudication.
perlu evaluasi.
Therefore, we need to monitor, we need to evaluate, and make revisions or improvement whenever possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Albertina. Also very well said. And may we also now hear from Yusek, please.
Thank you, Darlene. Actually, I am envious that the AFP is able to impose a quota of 40-40 and then 20 for those who are most qualified. Because when I was still in Congress, I wanted to legislate a quota for I just focused it then in Congress, but for um those in Congress. But then it was very difficult when I was still in the process of writing it and consulting with with stakeholder or consulting with stakeholders, consulting with advocates, consulting with other members of Congress. They didn't meet it positively. There were a lot of doubts, a lot of questions that we were not able to answer satisfactorily, at least to them, such as 40% was also the percentage I was thinking of then. But there were a lot of questions, and so it ended up that we didn't push for it. But that is, I would say, a best practice that I hope we could in the future adopt as well. And I think that this would really give, as was said in the video, a better, more holistic service to the people, uh, and would really push for women in all across all positions, not just the highest, but across all positions within the Australian Federal Police. And uh, I think maybe inching forward towards that, going back to what I said earlier, even if we can't right now in the Philippines push for a quota, or maybe in other ASEAN countries, we probably can't push for or legislate a quota, but we can inch towards that. I guess that is what I'd like to say. Um, how by monitoring like now, a while ago I presented the percentages of those occupying women in occupying positions in Congress, in cabinet, and being more conscious of it, and demanding that more women occupy these positions. Like, for example, in cabinet, we have a low percentage of cabinet members occupied by women, and they're occupying usually the departments that are traditionally handled by women. So this could be something that we can make the people more conscious of. And being conscious about it, about the problem, is the first step, because all of these are unconsciously done. The decisions to appoint women in, let's say, the Department of Tourism, um, or DSWD, is an unconscious decision. So maybe it's something that we can lobby to the executive, to the president, to appoint more women. And sooner or later, we can take little steps and be able to achieve that same best practice.
Okay. Thank you so much, Yusek, and for all our speakers for sharing your thoughts. And yes, those two videos are very powerful videos, and they've all both emphasized that the results are better if there is a multidisciplinary or multi-gender inputs or insights put into the results. So whether that be in the law enforcement area or in the judiciary. And but of course, I agree, Yusek, about the challenges that we must be aware at first, so that we would know or find the solutions to address these challenges. And I like to um, well, to take note of what you said, Yusek, you mentioned about the gender stereotyping, that women should not be really just to be stereotyped in putting in the protection and reintegration roles, and also what Lila has mentioned and Judge Alberta has mentioned about the execution of structures in place. All right, so thank you so much. We have time to answer some questions. I would like to invite my colleague, Chanapat Manidul. He's the country manager for Thailand, to join me in facilitating the question and answers we received from some of the participants. So, Pon, please.
Thank you so much, Attorney Darlene. And yes, it has been a very inspiring and also insightful um, discussion that we have with all the panel here today. And we have some questions that already came in. And first of all, we have this question that is input by Karen, who has mentioned that we have talked about we heard that there will be a better outcome for cases, particularly when they more women in the justice system. I'm just wondering if has there been any research or data or empirical data that could support this statement or this observation that we have? And if I may ask, if Judge Albertina, are you able to expand on this or perhaps share some thoughts further on this question? Thank you so much, Judge.
Baik, terima kasih. Saya tidak bisa mengatakan bahwa
Well, thank you. I cannot say that the prosecution will be better or education will be better if there are more female law enforcement officers. But what I can say is based on my experience.
Hukum sebagai hakim.
And this is because I'm a judge. I can say that in almost every court,
hakim-hakim yang di pengadilan-pengadilan itu selalu mereka berpendapat demikian. Kalau ada perkara
judges in my country have more or less same perception that cases that in cases where victims are women or girls, it would be good that the court proceedings are led by women judges because they have the empathy. Sometimes I would say, even as a male judge, you must have the competency to prosecute the case.
Anda juga hakim, Anda juga harus bisa.
They must have the same level of empathy and skills to adjudicate the case. But the men judges always perceive that women judges are more patient and very delicate when addressing victims. And women victims have more trust and they're willing to share more information or stories when they are speaking to women judges because they perceive that women judges have more empathy toward them. So this is a common notion among men judges in my country.
Ada yang laki-laki semuanya.
Well, I cannot deny the fact that in some courts there are only male judges, but this is a common perception. Unfortunately, I don't have empirical data about this, but this is an opinion shared by my colleagues that we need more women judges who seem to be more patient in addressing what victims need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judge Albertina, for your opinion. And perhaps, if I may also ask the same question to Ms. Leela as well, whether we have touched upon earlier in your part about the research on women in law enforcement in the ASEAN region. Has similar issue been identified, a similar outcome or any recommendation or research outcome came up in the research by you and ODC, the one that you have touched upon? Thank you.
Thank you, Kun Pom. There's no clear-cut data, and allow me to take some time in answering this question with a bit of. It's a question that requires a lot of nuance, because it involves making claim that involvement of certain person would equate so and so. So the question is like, does it result in better outcome of the case? That I think that's how the question is phrased. And I guess first of all, we probably have to define together what does it mean when a case have better outcome. Are we talking about the final outcome of the verdict in the cause, and what's considered better and what's considered worse? So that's already quite difficult. And it's very hard to measure in terms of numerical data in itself. There are, of course, some anecdotal information here and there in different countries, as Judge Albertina just said, like what she observed anecdotally among her colleagues, or sometimes there would be sort of like a small what do you call it, like a small state-wise research, say in American courts, where they would find that the involved of female judges tend to result in favor of the plaintiff in sexual harassment or sexual abuse cases, and result in more sort of considerations in terms of other compensations that she or he would have to be given. But again, those are not numbers. They are sort of like snapshots of different stories and observations. So in terms of saying, is there a number? No, because that's very difficult to be translated into data when you say what are the better cases. But I will try to reiterate my standpoint again, is that the involvement of diverse group of people will bring about enough diversity in order to answer to as much diverse situation as possible. So you increase the likelihood of better answering to existing clients, existing beneficiaries, however you might call it, more. And that's where I think the value of diversity in law enforcement, in criminal justice, lie personally. Thank you so much. But if there are breakthrough research on this, of course we will be sharing with the member states.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lila. Also, there are more questions here, of course, and maybe this one I would like to address and invite Yusek Lila to give the opinion on that. With the one that we'll be talking about, how do you think that we can balance between the promotion of women in leadership role and women own decision in choosing what job or position they are happy to take or they have to handle, because certain time women do not want to take those leadership role in a specific sector based on their own interest. So what are your opinion about this statement that shared by one of our audience?
Can I also give some comments on the question about like how can we assure that the outcome would be better if there would be more women?
Definitely,
I
please.
mentioned a while ago in my presentation that um, when the women heads were appointed, like for the head of the Women and Children Protection Center, the head of the IACAT. Before, when I was still in the DOJ, I was head of the IACAT for the DOJ, and then the head also of the NBI, National Bureau of Investigation, Anti-Human Trafficking Division, was female. That was the time when uh, the guidelines, the victim-centered approach was taken as a policy. Um, Victim-centered approach to prosecution. Um, when Justice Singh, who is a woman justice, was appointed to the Supreme Court and assigned to uh, uh, cases involving women, children, in terms of handling this in the court. Um, there was also a lot of innovations that occurred. Particularly, the Justice Sector Coordinating Council was more active in terms of protecting women's rights. A lot of capacity building sessions were cascaded to the judges in on the ground. So I think that these are proof that involving women and putting them in leadership positions, more particularly with respect to um, those cases involving women and children and trafficking in persons does produce better results in terms of being able to achieve a better outcome. Of course, if the because of these programs and policies, no matter what the outcome is, whether acquittal or conviction, you can see that the handling of the victim survivors uh, would be better in terms of being be able to provide them with better care. Now, going to your question, uh, it's true. It's true that there are women that who do not want to take leadership positions. They do not want to do this because not because they don't want to, but because of the circumstances, which where our poll again comes into mind. There's not enough support for women for their domestic responsibilities to take care of the child or children, to take care of the household. And because of the stereotype role of women, especially in Asian countries, to be the caregiver of the children and to take care of the household, um, there is a there is a pressure from society on women to perform this job, this role as caregiver, and that is why it discourages women. That expectation of women discourages women from accepting roles that would take more of their time and take time away from their responsibilities as a mother and as a as someone who is in charge of taking care of the household. Um, Based on my personal experience, that is the case. Um, I when I was in the DOJ, I barely saw my daughter because I was just working in the office until midnight until and it's like that every day. On weekends I would still have to work. So I missed that critical part of I missed a lot of milestones of my daughter's early life. And um and honestly, I in hindsight, I would have wanted to be there for her, and I would have taken a job that was less demanding, that was not a leadership position, to be with her. And I think that a lot of and this I think this experience resonates with a lot of women.
Thank you so much, Yusek. And that's the really personal view, which I'm very certain that a lot of women who would like to take a higher or stronger leadership role really have to think about it and really like affect their decision they have. And unfortunately, we have so limited time for this discussion and question and answer. So I'm sorry we cannot answer all the questions that had come through. I will make sure that we'll have a find a way to get back to you on those questions and comments. And without further ado, thank you so much. And I would like to hand the floor back to Attorney Aline. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pom, and of course to Yusek, Lila, and Judge Albertina. I think for question from Ratana Wrong, I think that has already been addressed by some of the responses from Yusek, Lila, and Judge Albertina. Now, there is still one more question here, and but I hope you can respond this when you give us your takeaways, because this is truly an insightful and of course an engaging exchange of ideas. As we are nearing to the end of our webinar, we have to cut some questions off, but I want to thank all of our participants for their well thought questions. And before we close, be would like to invite again our esteemed speakers to share any takeaways, any thoughts, or any recommendations that you would want our participants to remember from the webinar today. And in addition to that, you might want to put in this last question, because we're talking about member states supporting the promotion of gender sensitive guidelines. And in ensuring this is not just adopted in paper, how do we effectively implement a gender sensitive guidelines in among ASEAN member states. So I hope you can consider that point and include that in your takeaways for our participants. So thank you again. May we start with Judge Albertina, then Lila, then Yusek. You have the floor, Judge, for a 2-minute takeaway. I think you are on mute.
Ibu.
Menjawab mengenai masalah regulasi. Kalau menurut pemikiran saya, kita sering kalau kita berbicara kesetaraan gender ini,
gender equality is more directed to victims. That's what has happened so far. But we need to look at this beyond this. There are women witnesses, women defendants, and also other relevant women, for example, in cases of divorce. The women who are party in divorce cases also need attention. They also need assistance, as well as witnesses, women witnesses. Sometimes witnesses are treated like defendants. They are even treated worse than defendants. So they also need our assistance, our attention. And of course, women defendants are often given questions that are harassing. And I've seen a lot of these situations during my tenure as victim. So we have to protect women from various perspectives in the judicial system. So it is really necessary to raise women's awareness on their roles. They play crucial roles. And colleagues from the Philippines have shared about the challenges that we encounter in our countries. We share the same experience, especially with the community. So we need to raise their awareness. We need to raise community awareness in order to encourage more meaningful participation, as well as to address risks. We have to minimize the risk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge. So we take note on that. Raise community women awareness on their roles to encourage participation, meaningful participation, and to address the risk. Thank you so much, Judge. So Lila, please.
Thank you. So I'll try to both answer the question and also just my final thought at the same time. So might member states be supported in terms of implementing anything related to gender equality at all? I think that would come from the perspective of entities who support member state, right? Maybe ASEAN-ACT, maybe entity like UN, ODC, or any similar entity who have to go in and kind of get member state to be able to move on with all this policy. And one thing that I would like to kind of put in for a food of thought is that should member state be approached alone through sort of ruling body of that member state. Of course, you have to work with the government, you have to work with the parliament, you have to work with the people at the top of the pyramid, but member states are also the people that make up that state too. So from the ground up, you like international communities can support CSO, can support NGO who advocate for gender equality, can help create, as Judge just said, awareness from the ground up, any grassroots movement. All this matter in terms of disrupting the status quo on gender equality. It can have to come from both top down and trickle up from the grassroots movement, in my opinion, because intersectionality really matters. People of different economic challenge or different social status would have very different experience in experiencing gender inequality. And when I say disrupting the status quo, I feel like we have to try to move our conversation further, the boundary further into from asking for a share in this place. As we saying, we're looking for a quota that's reaching 30% in certain organization, 40%, or some are stuck at 25%. And we as the women in this webinar are perpetually forced to justify why we have to be involved. We never have to throw the burden of proof to the people who take up 70-80% of this arrangement and justify why can they take 80% of all this. What is it that justifiable about that? I'm not kind of pushing things to be like combatant in any way, but I'm just posing some questions of like, is it something that we have to keep asking for a share, or is it a right because they can be approached in a different way? Gender equality as sort of a charity from the status quo, or is it gender equality as a right for half of the population of any country of the world? I guess that's my like food for thought for the floor.
All right. Thank you so much, Lila. And so I get from your point that there should be good partnership, good support, good coordination, bottom up, top down. And of course, gender equality is a right and not just a charity. And I'm reminded about the resolution you shared earlier that it shouldn't be women's full, equal, and meaningful participation shouldn't be just an aspiration or an afterthought. So thank you so much for that. And then you said, please.
I will also try to answer your question and along that lines, give my takeaway for this afternoon's webinar. Whatever policy, victim sensitive guidelines, uh, or gender sensitive guidelines, whatever policy that will be implemented with respect to um, gender sensitivity has to involve not only the government but whole of society. As was mentioned earlier, civil society organizations have to be involved. The academe has to be involved. Media has to be involved because media plays a big role in shaping the minds of society, of the public. Um, Whereas I would say 30 years ago, it was completely acceptable for or even less, maybe even 20 years ago, a judge would berate a victim survivor, a rape victim survivor, for instance, and say, oh, why didn't you punch the guy who touched you, or why did you wear short shorts? And that was completely acceptable 20 years ago, but now it's no longer acceptable in our courts, and there are guidelines that would penalize judges who adopt that kind of questioning towards victim survivors. And much of that is because society's perception, the culture changes. And but this changes gradually, and all the players need to do their part in order to make it happen. Uh, whatever guidelines it is that we come up, gender sensitive guidelines, effective implementation has to be reinforced with the correct messaging in our media, our telenovelas, have to also reinforce this kind of uh, concept that that is wrong. Catcalling is wrong, and similar and the like. So I think that is my takeaway from it. And also, which also answers your question on being able to implement gender sensitive guidelines in courts, and in the implementation of our policies of safety of working persons. It's a whole of society approach to it. But we should never be discouraged. Like I said earlier, we win in inches. It's step by step, little by little. But when you look back, oh, that's how far we've come. We've been able to achieve all that. Sometimes we're just expecting monumental big steps to happen, and when they don't, when we fail at it, we feel that we've failed. But no, um there are little steps that we've been taking, and we've been making progress. And here in the Philippines, I've seen the effects, like um having more women now in leadership positions that I mentioned earlier. We were not only just able to come up with those guidelines, but also during the time that I was in the DOJ, there was an increase in convictions because of a certain policy that was rooted from taking care of the victims. Because in the Philippines, then for a case to be terminated, it would take years. But we adopted a policy that that gave way for plea bargaining. So this shortens, of course, there are some negatives to this, but this increased the convictions. This was able to also help the victims to reduce their stress, for the case to be concluded much faster. So, uh, uh, I hope that before I end, I'd like to go back to the video, which was presented earlier. Uh, I guess we women should just move forward and be brave, take the steps, because a lot of other women are looking at us for inspiration. So I hope that, and I know that this webinar, a lot of us were able to take that inspiration.
Thank you so much, Yusek. So, the whole of society approach is necessary in counter trafficking efforts and in changing mindsets. As you said, step by step, one step at a time, we'll get there. How difficult that journey would be. And of course, as you mentioned, correct messaging by or through the media. All right. Thank you again. It has truly been an inspiring afternoon to hear Yusek, Lila, and Judge Albertina share your perspectives and the passion that you bring to this important work that you do. And thank you for the rich discussion today. So may I now invite our team leader, Dr. Lucia Paitropoli, to give us a brief summary and her closing remarks. The virtual floor is yours, Lucia.
Thank you so much, Attorney Darlene, and thank you to all of us and all of you for joining this really important webinar on the topic of women.
Oops. I think we lost Lucia.
Apologies, have I frozen?
Yeah, I think we lost you a bit.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My connection might be a little bit unstable. It's been good for the last few hours. Let me begin again just to thank everybody for attending this really important webinar on women as drivers of change. I think in our webinar series, we often have a lot of contestation between the speakers, or we have one speaker present one perspective and another speaker present another perspective. But what's incredibly clear from our expert speakers, from our questions, from all of the discussion today, is the evidence is indisputable that women are drivers of change and that diverse leadership leads to better outcomes in counter-trafficking. So we have a really clear consensus and understanding that this is something that we need to do. And today's webinar really helped us unpack some of those practical barriers as to why we still don't have gender parity in law enforcement and in counter-trafficking actors more broadly. So Cecilia, really grateful to you and your perspectives from UNODC. I think it is really important that we engage with the data. And unfortunately, that statistic of 6 to 20% of underrepresentation of women in ASEAN law enforcement is still quite stark. Whilst we all believe it, substantively, we haven't achieved it. And you really pointed out some of these structural barriers that made us really realize that it's not just about adding more women. It's about creating the right enabling environment for women to thrive. And some of those factors that may influence women thriving is breaking down the perception that operational roles are for men and administrative roles or desk-based roles are for women, looking at childcare policies, maternity leave policies, HR policies, work-life balance policies, childcare opportunities, and really looking at how they play out in women's personal and professional lives. You talked about some of these barriers in the context of access to deployment, access to trainings and professional development, making sure our human resources and our infrastructure is gender sensitive, looking at retention data, looking at flexible work policies, and really making sure that it's not just a hollow commitment to adding more women and stirring, that it's really about an organisational commitment and an organisational culture to gender parity and gender diversity. I think your point that it's not about individual women basically seeing their own value, it's about the system seeing their value and everybody in the workplace and everybody in society seeing the value of women leaders. So again, a really systemic and holistic perspective offered there that shows us why the data still doesn't suggest that we're doing particularly well, but also what particular pathways and opportunities there are to remove some of those barriers. Judge Albertina, thank you very much for sharing the extremely valuable work of the Supreme Court of Indonesia and your working group on women and children. You started by talking about some of the different kinds of crimes that impact women and girls, particularly violent crimes and crimes of sexual violence. And we know that women and children that come in contact with the law need specialised, trauma-informed, gender-sensitive responses. If we don't provide those gender-sensitive responses, we know that victims are unlikely to testify, unlikely to want to participate in criminal proceedings. Witnesses are not likely to participate either. And you made a really strong point towards the end of your reflections, Judge, about it's not just gender sensitivity for victims. It also needs to be for perpetrators, for accused, and everybody coming in contact with the law. So really commend, and we're very inspired by the work of the Indonesian Supreme Court, the fact that you have a dedicated working group for women and children, that you have your regulation on women and children coming in conflict with the law. You have a handbook on adjudicating cases involving women in conflict with the law, regulations and procedures, so that these are not just abstract commitments, they're actually implemented in courts right across Indonesia. And also substantively, you have a clear procedure and process for restitution and compensation for victims. And this is particularly important when we look at the outcomes for women and girls as they do participate in criminal proceedings. We see that most of the time, the criminal justice system is not delivering substantive results. And then we move to a really inspiring and quite candid presentation from Yusek Villar. And I really do thank you, Yusek, for sharing not only your professional experiences, but also how it impacted your personal life, being a woman leader in counter-trafficking and leader of DSWD. I think you really added that there are still trade-offs, and there really shouldn't be trade-offs. We're in 2025. We've been talking about these issues for a really long time. We've made great gains in terms of the numbers, but when we look at that glass ceiling, we see that women that do succeed in leadership roles still make trade-offs in terms of family, in terms of work-life balance. And I think it really goes to some of the points made earlier that we need to consider gender sensitive policies, adequate childcare, adequate leave arrangements, parental leave, ensuring that men can take time off to raise children, ensuring also that there is a culture of promoting diversity within the workplace. You shared some really great examples from the Philippines of where you have made gains in gender equality. That you also gave some very good examples that the gender equality shouldn't just be at the top or the bottom of the organization. It needs to be filtered all throughout units and subunits, and that there are many examples of women leading these units and subunits in the Philippines. I think you made another really important point that we need to monitor and measure this, because we can all make commitments. We can all celebrate International Women's Day once a year, but we actually need to look at what the data is telling us. Is the gender balance improving? Is the leadership journeys and pathways for women improving? Are the maternity leave policies delivering outcomes for women? Is the childcare being used? Is it adequate? Is it accessible? So the importance of actually monitoring our workplace diversity and gender plans is also really important. So in closing, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that trafficking in persons is a really complex problem. Victims of crime come from diverse backgrounds. It happens to men, women from different ethnicities, people with disabilities. It happens to children. It happens to adults. So because crime, and particularly trafficking in persons, happens to a wide range of people, it completely makes sense that we need many minds and diverse minds to devise solutions and appropriate responses to these complex crimes. Gender and workplace diversity clearly makes sense. It's not only the right thing to do, it's something that we must do to propel us forward in our efforts to counter trafficking. Now that we have a better understanding of what some of those practical barriers are to women's participation in leadership roles, let us all commit to accelerating our actions to remove those barriers, to achieving full gender parity in law enforcement, the judiciary, and all the agencies that play a really critical role in preventing and responding to trafficking in persons. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a really inspiring and valuable discussion, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.
Okay, thank you so much, Lucia. Excellent closing to end the very robust discussion this webinar. So on behalf of ASEAN-ACT, to Ms. Salila Rataruksa, to Judge Albertina Ho, to USEC Emeline Aglipa Villar, it has been a great honor and pleasure to have you all as our panelists. So please accept our sincere gratitude. And to all our participants, thank you very much for your contributions and engagement in the polls and in the discussion with our panelists. We hope we all can carry forward the lessons and momentum from this session into our daily work and the learnings that we got from all our participants. If you still have time, we would like to have this one group photo with everyone, please. Ploy, could you give us a cue if you're ready?
Okay, sure, Darlene.
Thank you.
1, 2, 3.
And then another one with the wave, please.
And 1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you, everyone, for giving us your time this afternoon. So, to all our participants, one last reminder, please. Your webinar experience is very valuable to us, and we would appreciate your feedback. Please complete the one-page feedback survey. It's posted in the chat box. You'll receive your certificate of attendance after the completion of the feedback, and also the recording of this webinar is accessible in our ASEAN-ACT portal, including the materials that was presented by our esteemed speakers. So again, thank you so much and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you again, everyone. Bye-bye. Oh,